Board games, board games, it's what we're talking about. Board games, I'm not gonna shout. I am starting off this streaming with a little bit of singing. And now over to this side of me is the person known as Mandela FG. Mandela has, well, that's their name, and they've made a published game from Lookout Games, and we're going to talk about familiarity. Familiarity. We're going to talk about this thing, Mandela and me. Board games and familiarity. It's what we're talking about. Board games and familiarity. I'm not gonna shout. Hey! Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Mandela. Good morning,
Good
Sid.
morning.
It's lovely to see you. And as always, I am Bez. It's his bedtime in some countries. It's his busy bedtime board game bladder. And we are talking about the value of familiarity. We're also talking about the value of Mandela. I mean, I just can't get out words anyway. So, like, Mandela is this lovely person. We kind of knew each other back in the day in Glasgow. You know, we both come from somewhere. You know, it's like this lovely, you know, looking at the front of that board game cover, that's like the necropolis, isn't it? You sort of see from there into, like, I think that's St. Mungo's Cathedral Church. I come from. Is it St. Mungo's Cathedral?
St. Mungo's, the old Glasgow Cathedral in the centre.
Yeah, where, like, you know, gave rise to the whole, this is the bird that never flew, this is the tree that never grew, this is the fish that never swam, this is the bell that never rang. And, you know, someone said, you know, that's quite so dismal, you know, saying for Glasgow. It's kind of like saying, hey, here's Glasgow, the city where nothing happens. But yes, there's kind of little weird stories attached to each one involving religion and kind of praying and finding things. But anyway, we're both from this familiar background. We've met again in London. Lovely person. It's lovely to have you on the show. And you proposed this great topic. So can you explain why we are talking about the value of familiarity?
Yeah, lots of reasons. I'm glad you think it's a great topic, but it's funny that we're already seeing some of the value of familiarity here. Bez getting excited thinking about Glasgow, thinking about your hometown.
And also
what it invokes for you to see those sites again. And see each other. As Bez mentioned, funny coincidence there that we had actually crossed paths when we were both very wee, and now coming back again, both interested in board games, both designing board games. But the reason for this topic is I just think it's a really interesting area that I don't see spoken about as much, because everybody, well, to generalize that much, but a lot of people talk about how much we need more innovation in the board game sphere and how excited they get by innovation. And, you know, I'm one of those people. And I think it's completely understandable stance. I'm there as well. You know, I get really excited when something's completely new and seems fresh, and they bring that to the table. But then that means sometimes we overlook the fact that there really is a value in the familiar within that sphere. There's a lot that we can gain from that. There's a lot we can learn about using these familiar components, whether they be mechanisms or themes or other experiential touch points. So I just think it's like I say, an interesting area to explore that you don't hear so many people talking about, certainly not in a positive way. You know, you get more often this theme is worn out, and another one of those games using that mechanism, and so on. But they keep coming out, and a lot of them keep being successful despite people.
Yeah. And so, like, it's like kind of seeing these things, and then we see it's like a familiar face. And speaking of familiar faces, we've got so many familiar faces saying hello. And so hello to New Zealand. It's lovely to have you, Cheap Sheep Games. And
Hello.
Morning, Andrew January, another familiar face from Royal Festival Hall. It's kind of like we are together, you know, not really, but, you know, do you remember those big white round tables at Royal Festival Hall where we used to play test? And hopefully we will again one day. And Alex, lovely to see you. And this is just the intro, by the way.
I'm just
Slates
getting
is
carried
right.
away, Alex. We'll get some proper chat in the intro later.
And then, Chris, good morning. This is lovely to see you. And, you know, nowadays, you know, you've been away for a while, Alex. I like to kind of just, you know, get stuck into the topic straight away before saying, okay, now that's enough of a thing. That's going to come up later. And, yep, there we go. Now it's coming up today. You see how the banner changed at the bottom? Now we're not talking about it. Now it's happening. Just to explain for anyone who isn't already familiar, but now we go on to the scheduled daily dose of positivity for the next 10-ish minutes, and we talk about brilliant things. Brilliant things. What's a little thing which is brilliant?
So am I sharing my brilliant thing now?
Yeah.
Or I didn't know how long I could get you to hold the maybe a little bit.
I just kind of try to just do that. And I mean, one of these days, maybe there will be a new person in chat and just say, hey, has Bez frozen? And then everyone will say, no, Bez does that every morning. But,
I should have seen how long I could keep you hanging in there.
I mean, if you just, maybe I should, like, I'm trying to remember who's on today. Yeah, Chris, when you're on, I'm just going to hold it as long as you kind of get stuck into the brilliant thing straight away. Anyway, so your brilliant thing is all about taking a break, right?
Yeah, taking a break because, well, particularly in the current situation, I've been quite bad for taking breaks. I've been actually scarcely leaving the house, if I'm honest, because just getting on with work and there's fewer places to go and whatnot. But I took a break, and so my brilliant thing is a wee toy to remind me of that. And this was one in, if you ever go to the seaside, and I'm very into the 2p machines that you get there, the wee 2p, you know, penny pushers, and they drop off and hopefully you get some money back. Of course, the house always wins, but sometimes they have the wee gifts in them as well. And this time I went on a break with one of my friends who I share a bubble with, so don't worry, we're being safe and cautious of that. But they insisted that I actually take a break and go off, and we went camping and we went to the seaside in Hastings, and it was just wonderful to get away, to not have any devices as well. You know, I didn't even have reception out there camping, so even if I'd wanted to, it wouldn't be a choice. But then on the day we hit Hastings, hitting the 2p machines and, you know, winning big.
Wow, that's a lot of prizes. Okay.
Turns out not bad. That's what £2 will get you, you know, you make it last. So.
Congratulations. I mean, so yeah, taking a break, it is just a nice thing, isn't it? Because, I mean, sure, we all have to do stuff. We all have to keep doing stuff. And sure, there's value in keeping on going. I think that's the value of all those drawing exercises where it's like, okay, you'll do this thing every day for 30 days, or okay, I'm going to draw a cube every day, or I'm going to draw a sheep every day, and then eventually start getting better at it, or you start experimenting with different ways to draw sheep, because maybe you start off drawing, you know, basic. Anyway, the point is there's value in actually getting stuff done, but also there's a need to recharge yourself. There's a need to recharge your energy. There's a need to get inspiration from outside. And so I think, yeah, taking a break, right on. And so moving on to, obviously this is included, but let's talk about recent highlights, living life and seeing the sights, recent highlights, playing games and other delights, recent highlights. So, what have you enjoyed in the past day or the past time since I saw you?
Well, that would be my big highlight, I guess, was going away, going camping, having lovely food cooked directly on the fire as well, having that crispy, delicious chicken with the infused with smoke, completely burnt on the outside, but delicious all the same.
Nice.
Having all my meals like that.
My mouth is watering.
Long walks, yeah. Being away from a computer screen for a long time, sitting on the beach, hearing the waves crash, you know, walking through the woods, all of that sort of stuff to get away. And like I say, and like you mentioned, I'm someone who's kind of obsessed a little bit with making progress on things and improving and getting things done. So being forced out of that and being forced to just let my mind settle a little bit was absolutely a highlight for me. How about you, Bez?
Well, before we get to me, I just wanted to say a quick hello to Dina, who's joined us in the comments and has had a break from meetings. So congratulations, talking about taking wee breaks. And lovely to have you with us. I'm going to talk about Wavelength, which is this game that you can also see on the screen. These are some photos that I took. I played this with Chris and McCall. It's a wonderful game, also known as Perfect Match, as we've discovered in Germany. Were you aware of this, Mandela?
No, not at all. I've only seen it as Wavelength.
Well, it's also called Perfect Match, and then the second game, the other game that we played a couple of times, is this prototype of Dogo Dash. I really love the artwork that's on here.
Great.
Like, if you check out how like all those cats are very similar for utility, but you know, they have little different details, which I really appreciate that kind of work. Okay, here's all the space cats with different guns. Sure. And here's all the bears who are cooking up different meals, and it's like just a fun thing. Anyway, so that was with Chris and McCall. And
so whose game is Dogo Dash? Need to give
so Dogo Dash. Oh yes, sorry. Dogo Dash is by Talita Rhine, and Talita Rhine is putting it on Kickstarter in a wee bit. Kitty Cataclysm is by me, and this is by Wolfgang Warsch and Alex Haig and Justin Vickers. But like, there's all sorts of artists, and we shouldn't like forget about these amazing people. So yeah, that is our recent highlights. And if you're in the chat, feel free to share what are your recent highlights, or also if you want, feel free to, as we enter the next section, ask, you know, any silliness that we get into, because I think you know what's coming up. It's time for the questionably quick questions. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, so where exactly are you in the world?
I'm in the Medway towns in Kent, so not far outside of London. Sitting specifically in my little room where I spend most of my time.
A wee bit closer to the coast.
A wee bit closer to the coast. It's a little bit, sort of dangles Kent more towards London, and Kent has tried to disassociate it from Kent frequently, but with no luck. It remains part of Kent for now.
Oh, so you're not actually part of that inner Kent. You are like the reject child of Kent. Oh man, that's sad.
Exactly.
What time exactly is it?
Sorry?
What time is it exactly?
Exactly 13 minutes past 10.
Okay, and what is your first memory?
It's the feeling of material, actually. It's the feeling of a chair when I was very small, curled up and able to sleep. In that chair, I remember shifting to try and be comfortable. And I can remember exactly the color and the pattern and the feel of that material against my skin. And it's funny, I've not really thought about that much before, but I can instantly recall it as you ask. Yeah.
That's sweet. That's lovely. Dina has a question. The color of the elastic that you usually use for your hair. Do you usually tie your hair in a...
I don't tie my hair back. No, I let it run free and wild, and it's longer and wilder since lockdown, and I've not been getting it cut anywhere. So, but no, I don't try and restrain it.
What is your go-to comfort food?
My go-to comfort food, because I eat porridge every day. Right? But at the same time, that's still kind of a comfort food. I don't know if it's a go-to if I eat it every day.
I think it clearly is. Like, you're going to it every day. How can you not go to something more?
Exactly. So I guess if I was deprived of porridge or peanut butter, or oats generally, like oat cakes as well, I eat a lot of peanut butter. I'm trying to cut down a bit.
We want to know more about this porridge. Do you mix anything in? Like,
yeah, I'll mix it up. I was on just the porridge and salt for a while. I just haven't porridge with water and salt, so very plain. But for example, this morning I actually had it with some chocolate mix and blueberries in there. Pretty regular is sliced banana, blueberry, cinnamon, and honey. Is
so real sweet treat.
Yeah, so I guess that's actually even more maybe the comfort element of it, making it a particularly fancy porridge to start my day with.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like Dina's using it as a base for other things. So yeah, there is just so much.
Dina's along the right tracks. I certainly want to get more adventurous with.
You know what I like? I like porridge mixed with some salty peanut butter, like some peanut butter, some salt, and jam. So it's like peanut butter, jam, salt porridge.
That's a lot going on. I did actually have some peanut butter in my porridge today as well. I forgot to mention that, because what I do is I have the tub of peanut butter and I go spoon in like that, and that's a good way to start the day.
Yeah. So Chris is talking about the thing behind you where you've got these white squares going up. How many squares are on there?
I have to count. So that's let's see.
I'm going to guess 36. Oh no, it looks like 49. 2,
there you
3,
go.
4, 5, 6, 7.
3,
yeah,
6, 7 by 7. Yeah.
49.
There you go. That's the huipala.
That's what the people want to know. Alex asks, do you have a party trick?
Yeah, I think I actually have a. What do I have as a party trick? I have a couple. Oh, I can sort of dislocate my shoulder. Do people want to see that? It looks a bit. I
mean, I don't know.
It does me no harm. It just looks a bit unpleasant, probably.
Just because it might gross some people out, and it's not like I can flash up a banner and then tell people they're.
We're getting strong chat as well.
Yeah. So yeah, people do not want to see this.
Stick my shoulder blades out. What else can I do? As a party trick.
And someone's like, "Yep, I want to ask you to show me in person."
Yeah, you can see if we ever meet. It used to happen just.
Sate's got some medical advice here.
Yep, that's it. Every time. Yeah, I have heard this. I don't tend to do it as a habit now.
It might not hurt, but it may have future ramifications for the joints. Says Chris.
I am probably exaggerating this. I don't think it's a full dislocation. So what happens is the muscle comes. It might freak people out actually to hear me describe it.
Okay, let's slightly move on, because this is meant to be a board game show.
I will say, so there's a weird thing that in the academic field that I work in, it's well known that people have party tricks. It's a thing that's going out of fashion, but it used to be that at these academic conferences with these generally older professors and whatnot, there would become a stage in the evening where people had imbibed enough to want to show their party tricks. And my former supervisor, when I did my PhD, actually at the time tore a ligament in his ankle because he dressed up as Tina Turner and tried to break dance. Wow. At one of these conferences. He could break dance a bit. That was his go-to party trick. But apparently he could not do it so successfully in heels. So that caused downfall there. A bit of an additional challenge. And other people, somebody used to...
Yeah, break dancing is going to be a very difficult style of dancing to do in heels, I think.
Yes. Quite
for that.
Yeah. So yes, I need to up my party trick game for future conferences, I think.
Wow, there's a lot of chats about things popping out of places, and okay, yep, I'm not going to pop that all up. Anyone watching this video in like 3 weeks' time will just have to wonder what was popping out of where. And yep, okay. Now back to the what do you do when you're not making board games?
Oh well, I guess this ties into
what field is it?
There, yeah. So most of the time I'm a scientist. I work in the field of chemical ecology and entomology. but I also dabble in some other things. So I also lecture at a university on ecology and entomology and pest management, things related to that. So I mostly work with smells, is my main focus. I work with odors and how they affect animal behavior and how we can manipulate animal behavior using odors, with a focus on low-income countries. So we try to improve livelihoods in low-income countries by tackling problems that affect human health. And a lot of my work is focused on agriculture as well, so trying to improve livelihoods that way. But I also try and do, and I guess this is a bit similar to, in some ways, to my game design approach, in that I do stuff that I think is important for some people, that's useful for some people, but I also try and do some stuff that I just think is quite cool and quite fun. It entertains me. So I also work in forensics a little bit. I'm writing a paper at the moment about with one of my PhD students about calculating the time of death on cadavers and how that's changed under different circumstances and things like that. So I also do a little bit of forensic science, for example, as a bit of fun side project, I guess.
This is really cool. Yeah, and morning, Javier. It's lovely to see you. I believe that there's 2 games involving smells. The Perfumer is one, and there's one from a French company I tried in February, or maybe it was February last year. But this French company has these crazy games. They're a bit simplistic. They're aimed at kids. Basically, you've got these things that you sniff, and then you've got to work out what they are, and basically then you look at the bottom. If you were right, you move forwards. If you were wrong, you don't move forwards, kind of thing. And then they've got another game where you're literally popping pills, but these pills are just kind of taste things. And it's like, okay, what does this taste like? Oh, it tastes like that. And then you need to be the first one to grab the token of what it tastes like, if you know what I mean. So everyone has to pop the pill at the same time. It's like just a little tiny white pill that has the taste of like pears or nectarines, and it's a synthetic compound to make it taste like a thing. But anyway,
there must be a whole additional challenge in getting those things through food standards agencies and
yeah,
get that.
But there's also this somewhat strategic game that Javier has mentioned, the Perfumer. Have you tried any of these games?
No, I haven't. I did see, I think, am I correct? Maybe Javier can say, or yourself, Perfumer was the one that you scratched and sniffed. Was that the one?
Yes, I believe so. And there's a little bit, it's kind of like you've got hidden objectives, I think. This one I've not played.
I saw this one at Spiel in Essen, and I was with a friend. We walked past it, and I was interested. And there's also part of me that thought, busman's holiday, because a lot of what we do is identifying pheromones, identifying unique and composing these odor combinations in the chemistry side of things, the analytical chemistry side. So I am genuinely interested, but no, unfortunately, I've not had the chance to try any of those ones. And there's a bit of a thing sometimes when we smell, people who work in my field, when we smell these things, certainly within our research group, we'll describe them by the chemical components if we identify what any of those are by nose. And I wonder if I'm too tuned into that I'll be trying to think, has this got some methyl salicylate in it, or is there jasmonate I'm detecting, or things like that, rather than trying to get this, ooh, I'm in a rose garden or whatever it's meant to be.
Like, do you think that you would like to make a smelly game, if you know what I mean?
I actually currently have not a great deal of interest in making games that relate to my field of study. I guess it allows me to keep the gaming side as more of an escape, more of a complete switch off from that. I mean, I love what I do as a job. That's why I do it. It's a real passion for me. But if I'm trying to take a break from that, as was just commented there, would it be too much like taking work home? I think, well, I mean, I certainly do take work home a lot. I mean, that's not the thing there. But yes, that would be taking work into my hobby. a bit more, and I'm not sure to the extent to which I want those two to mix. I say that maybe someday, and Dina there agrees. Yeah, just having that little respite. Someday I'll probably cave. There's some systems in.
I mean, they say a change is as good as a rest, and whether you think that's true or not. I mean, it depends what you're changing. So, like, if I was, doing one form of manual labor all day, then doing a second form of manual labor is certainly not as good as an actual physical rest. And so it has to be a change. But certainly if you're doing manual labor and then you change to something where it's more mental exertion, then, and for sure you can build yourself up, like, to a certain degree, whether it's physical stamina and strength or mental fortitude to keep going. But I'm going to stop the questionably quick questions here. I'll just get to the ones that have already been written.
Okay.
So Sate asks, can you cook?
Yeah, in fact, I used to work making curries and pizza. I worked in a takeaway for a while. But I wonder if Bez knows it. Casablanca in Glasgow. It's in Hindland. Do very good pizza.
I think I have heard of it. I don't think I ever.
It was run by Iranian.
Is it all closed now?
It was run by Iranian people, actually. That's
Okay.
just entirely coincidence. I didn't until I asked. No, it's still running. So a little bit, but not very varied, unfortunately. I'm not. I've not got a wide range of things I can go to. And actually, I'm not one of those people that's so natural. Some people can taste things and they go, "I know exactly what this needs to sort of balance out this flavor and that flavor." And I don't think I've got that natural touch that I see other people with.
And finally, a question from Javier, who asks, what is your favorite smell?
It is a very tough one. A lot of the stuff I work with does not smell so nice, but some of it does. I like all those floral odors, the plant odors there. Probably something very very uninspiring, like cinnamon or cooking bacon. Probably one of those more classic ones.
I love cinnamon.
I always think of the bacon thing as a little bit. My mum didn't have a sense of smell when she was younger, and it turned out to be a problem with the nose, which cleared. And she says the day it cleared, her father was cooking bacon. So that was the first smell that, as an older person, she really smelled, and she has this very strong reaction to that. The memories it brings back and everything. And I think just from hearing her talk about that, I also have something of an additional association. Like, oh, isn't it great that I have that sense that I can absorb smell and actually enjoy that? Yeah, because somebody said they're their friends anosmic, and we all have varying degrees of anosmia. Yeah, so an ability to detect smell. So I guess it's being able to remind myself as well. Isn't it fantastic that I can smell things and engage in that part of the sensory world?
Yeah, for sure. We have to appreciate all our senses. I don't think we've really talked about how brilliant the senses are at the start of the show. I should go through all of them. Like, I start off sometimes saying, okay, we've talked about 3 shapes, but then I don't do all the shapes going up in number of sides or whatever. And we just kind of dart from here to there. And at one point, someone was meant to make a spreadsheet, but never did. But as we go into the main topic, feel free to comment, ask questions, follow. We are talking about the value of familiarity. And let's start it off by tying it into what you were just saying, like that familiarity of smelling bacon, or it's got this emotional resonance, doesn't it? As soon as you see something that you're familiar with, you talked about Glasgow, and it's like, I was born there. I spent decades there. I'm not going to say exactly how long, but I spent a long time in Glasgow. Obviously, I used to go, to holidays, visit family in Iran, and there was a time when I went to, okay, we're getting into my life now, going into Dundee, came back to Glasgow, then came to London. And so I spent, the bulk of my life in Glasgow. You look confused.
How long were you in Dundee?
For about 3 years.
I was in Dundee for 4 years.
Huh. Wow. Okay, maybe we kind of passed by each other. I was studying computer games design technology at Abertay, but then it became all about programming and not at all about the game design, which is the part that interested me. So I basically quit it, went into... Anyway, this isn't meant to be about me.
No,
even though like this is like a lovely thing. This is a thing. Like as soon as you have something that's familiar, you starts off, it rushes down and it fills you with all these glorious memories. And it's like, you know, isn't it nice and lovely?
Yeah.
And yeah, it's like the familiarity. Like people are familiar with... Sorry.
Weird thing about the familiarity as well. Oh, some of my team are working on the smells of soils and things, kind of relates, I guess, to petrichor. So the familiarity thing is weird because you see people sometimes meet from the same town or country or something like that, and they do this thing, and I think it's really weird and silly to hear, but I do it myself as well sometimes, where they are just mentioning things that they might both know. You know, oh, do you know that park where da da da? And the other person says yes, and it's like, well, I mean, that doesn't mean anything extra necessarily, but it, for some reason, gives them this little lift to know that somebody shared something with them, that there's this familiar thing there. You know, the same thing when you said you'd be to Dundee, I kind of thought, oh, that's funny. We could, you know, I could list off some of the places in Dundee, you know, maybe we even knew some of the same people there, whatever. And that would just be like ticking boxes, you know, it'd just be listing what's there. But
I mean, that's kind of the value of a shelfie, isn't it? When people see, oh, this is all the games that are on your shelf. Oh, sorry, I just realized I've still got that banner up. Yeah, kind of saying, oh, I've got these games. Oh, you like those games. Oh, we're friends because we both like similar things. And
yeah,
it's so immaterial.
You know, to comment on something, I guess, that's also related to that is looking at what is popular also probably brings people some sense of value in the familiar. Like, you know, they say with Kickstarters, they do better when they're funded and when they're exceeding those funding goals because people look and they go, I want to kind of be on that bandwagon. And I think in the same way, looking at what other people are into and seeing that familiarity, oh, you like Wingspan as well, or I like Wingspan, you know, I'm seeing it all over the place, and that kind of increases the value of the association that people have those. You know, and like say, spying on people's shelfies, you know, gives people something of that slight lift on familiarity. So that's it in a general sense.
Sometimes Chris says it's about sharing what you've got. So you kind of share your experience and then you bring someone else into the fold, maybe. And it's like that joy of teaching, because the joy of teaching is partially that you kind of, I think there's the Jewish word naches, where it's all about the pride, not in oneself, but in the pride in a child or a student. And you've got little bits of that. You've also got the little bits of the joy of reliving these moments that you're then teaching. And yeah, and Alex is also saying it's in an familiarity is also an interesting aspect within game design, at least to me. I love to mix familiar elements that are intuitive to players with a little twist somewhere to break their expectations, if I can. I mean, for sure.
I think, Alex, actually, you're mentioning the main thing I'd want to talk about here, which is in line with game design and people's taste there. We mentioned some of the broad kind of benefits of familiarity on a personal level and so on, but in game design, it brings a lot to the table in terms of, you know, Alex is talking about putting in something unfamiliar there as well to break expectations. I like the idea of having these innovative elements in there in a game, having something that does not comply to people's expectations of how games should play or something like that. It might make it more memorable experience for them, it might stand out. But I think if you're doing that, a lot of the time you want to have a mix of familiar elements in there as well, something to ground them, something to make it more approachable in that sense, because with the unfamiliar, you're immediately facing a higher learning curve, a bit of a barrier at least to getting in, because they need to learn something that might seem completely counterintuitive, might be completely new to them on that front. So having, that is one of the big, and I've noted a couple of things that I think are kind of advantages to the familiarity, and one of the big
if
ones.
We can take a step back, and yeah, like, I think it's fairly obvious, but let's do a definition. What are we talking about?
Okay.
Familiarity, is it just things that we've seen a certain number of times or have a pre-existing knowledge about? Is that what familiarity is?
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable explanation. Things that we have encountered previously and have an understanding of. I think that's actually the important part, is having an understanding of, because going beyond, we'll get into that, but with mechanisms and with themes and things, it's also about having an understanding of what those are.
And I guess whether that understanding is because you've experienced it firsthand, or whether it's because you've read about it in a book or whatever, that you could still say that you're familiar with that. Like, if someone's looked at photos of the Mona Lisa and they've read up on it, even though they've maybe not been to the Louvre yet, presumably they're entranced by this thing. Maybe they want to go, maybe they've not had a plane ticket, maybe they're living in USA or Nigeria, I don't know. But anyway, so this person who's never seen the Mona Lisa, you could still say they were familiar with the Mona Lisa, do you think?
Yeah, I think absolutely. And that's where, as we'll see with, let's say, games having a reference point. If I have a game and there's a piece that's available in it called the Mona Lisa, and it's a picture of the Mona Lisa, immediately this has connotations for people. They don't need to have seen the Mona Lisa, but they understand it's a valuable painting. It's a sought after, it's a well-revered painting. And they might even know the artist, whatever, but it's more that it takes it to that level. Whereas if I put in a painting that, my friend does and hangs in the next room, then what's that going to mean to people? I think it's very valuable. I think it's great, but they have the familiarity to draw on. And therefore, with the Mona Lisa, I don't need to explain in the rules necessarily, by the way, the Mona Lisa, it's kind of a big deal. It's
an expensive painting.
Exactly. You don't need
if you've got the Mona Lisa, then you'll presumably, if you've got the Mona Lisa or this little painting that no one's heard of, and it's a game all about collecting paintings or stealing paintings, or I don't know what you might
say it's stealing paintings. If the game is about stealing paintings, you can sit down to the table and you can see the image of the Mona Lisa and know surely that one's going to be worth quite a bit. You can see, Scream, Munch's Scream, and go, that's probably one of the higher prize ones in the game.
Yes.
Compared to these ones I've never seen before. And now that's immediately set somebody into a situation where the game has become more approachable to them, because they don't need to look at, icons basically or something like that and say, okay, this one's going to be the higher value one, this one's going to be, and I now need to commit that to memory.
That makes lots of sense, and for sure, this sort of piggybacking on that area, on some pre-existing concepts, and being able to tap into that to say, hey, I've got these understandings. Javier and Dina have a couple of questions, which Javier asks, how long does it take to build familiarity? If I experience something only once, would you consider me to be familiar with it?
I think that's where it's obviously going to be variable with the user. I think if you've experienced it once, but you have understood it and it's stuck with you, the ideas behind that. So for example, if you have played a game that uses worker placement mechanism and you didn't understand that game, sometimes people are kind of overwhelmed when they first learn a game and they don't really know what's going on and it sort of passes them by entirely, then maybe you're not really familiar with it, because you could play that game or another worker placement game on a subsequent occasion, and at that point you really understand what's going on, and at that point you're familiar with it, and it would hit you with a new kind of, oh, I get this, oh, this is, and it would be new to you, and that'd be the experience. But then every time that you played a worker placement game after that, that core idea of worker placement would be familiar to you. I think it would no longer hold that experience of, oh wow, right, that's how that works. That's a new thing to me.
And so it really depends on the nature of those experiences. It's not just about tabulating them. And I guess I should shout out to Jeff Engelstein, who uses the notion of fuzzy logic to say, you know, something isn't you're familiar or you're not, or you're tall or you're short. It's kind of not a binary thing. It's a fuzzy line, and you can be more familiar or less familiar. It can be somewhat familiar or incredibly familiar. I mean, you would say that, are you familiar with board games? Well, somewhat, but yeah. I'm not as familiar with, you could say that I'm not as familiar with all the board games that exist as Tom Vassell, potentially. And also there's familiarity with different aspects of things, I guess, like different details. So like board game, I might have a deeper understanding of ways to resolve negative feedback loops than Tom Vassell. I don't know. I'm not saying that Tom Vassell can't. I'm just saying, you know, there's going to be different.
He's calling. He's being called out right now. Tom Vassell.
Javier says, how much does it vary across different types of experiences, building that familiarity? Does it vary based on smell, taste, board games, knowing the Mona Lisa?
Yeah, I'm not. That's an interesting question. It's a difficult one to think about. I mean, I would actually ask Javier, can you express what kind of different experiences you might mean by that? Do you mean different modalities of encountering these things? I mean, if it's something that is coming to you from various different angles, let's go back to this Mona Lisa example, not one I plan to focus on, but you know, it's sure. Possibly a good example because
everyone's familiar with it.
Yes, exactly. And if I had only learned of the Mona Lisa through playing board games, let's say, then the extent to my familiarity might be lower, let's say, than if I had been exposed to a greater variety of media and I'd realized, oh wait, it appeared in that film I watched, you know, it was in Mr. Bean film or whatever. Oh, it was also in this book I read, they made a reference to it. And in this TV show, they've spoken about it a couple of times, you know, and in this, so maybe if I'm actually getting the range, which is actually what's happened with Mona Lisa, you know, I don't know a point where I didn't know about that painting, oddly, because as soon as I was absorbing media from whatever different sources, even, you know, kids' books, cartoons that I'd watch as a kid, and then, you know, films, everything, there were trickles of it coming in. I see somebody claiming they heard about it on Stuff by Bez. Exactly. So even here, you know, I am emphasizing, I am further solidifying this idea of what the Mona Lisa means, you know, as a broader idea, this idea that it's a high value, coveted piece of art. So,
and for sure, at a certain point, it becomes self-propagating.
Yes.
And I think that if I might try to answer Javier's question a little bit, it's also about different styles of learning. If people are sometimes learning by doing, learning by watching, some people learn by reading better, some people learn by watching better. It's why some people prefer to read rule books. I would actually prefer to read a well-written rule book than watch a Rodney Smith video. I have watched you know, Rodney Smith videos, and you know, Rodney does a brilliant job, as does Paul Grogan, obviously, as do many other people within the industry. But personally, I prefer a nicely written sheet of paper, which, since I'm bigging up Paul Grogan, obviously anyway, the point is that it's all about, you've got these different channels. Some of them are going to stick more, some of them are not. And going back to Dina's question, it seems to be a bit about shared culture. You would want to trigger the familiarity in the audience, right? So how does one best communicate in order to trigger this desired familiarity. So we need to assume a certain level of recognizable factors based on shared culture. Like talking about the Mona Lisa, is this definitely a worldwide thing? I mean, we are all, I think everyone here is either based in an English-speaking country or in Europe, everyone watching. So correct me if I'm wrong, if like even Jess, who sometimes pops in, who's based in Thailand, you know, came from the UK. So everyone's got this kind of Western, English-speaking centric kind of viewpoints. Maybe we need to appreciate things, and it ties back, yeah.
And that is really something I think would be very interesting to talk about, and I'd like to talk about, is that what we are talking about with is familiar is specifically to a Western, a European, and North American audience of familiarity when we're focusing on board games. In North America, that's excluding Mexico as well, actually, from that, you know, really just the English-speaking North America, where we have these cultural touch points that we take for granted as familiar and go to. But going back to the previous question there on, I think it was Dina that asked, I didn't get a chance to approach. It was interesting because I didn't, when I proposed this topic, this actually wasn't an aspect I'd intended to go into, the sort of the benefits in an emotional and emotive sense from familiarity. But since it's come up, kind of interesting though, I think to take an example, what I was thinking of with familiarity is more for the ease of learning, approachability, those sorts of aspects. But you can certainly gain additional benefits from tapping into factors like nostalgia and those kind of elements of familiarity. So I have a game that should be coming to Kickstarter at some point with the publishing company Play for Keeps. It'll be their first release. I designed that game about stained glass windows initially. Bez played it at some point in an earlier form, and it turned, and Andrew, I know, was in the chat as well, has played it at some point, and it was stained glass windows initially, which worked very well for the ease of reading the cards and so on. And Play for Keeps are going to release that with a theme of 90s toy crazes. It's now called Overstocked. And that, I think, is presumably exactly that kind of thing, of exploiting a familiar area, because I've seen some people react to that by going, oh my God, Furbies. Oh, I have to get this game because I have fond memories of Furbies, because I have fond memories of yo-yos in the playground or Tamagotchis, other factors which feature in this. I would still say that that is obviously pandering to a particular audience with that. You know, I don't think all of those will be familiar to all of the different, you know, the global community. They simply didn't grow up necessarily with all of those. And obviously people here as well. I showed that to my friend who didn't have a TV or anything when they were younger, and they were just confused by these objects they saw before them. You know, they had no point of reference there. But you can obviously look at what your target demographic are going to be, and if most of the people that were going to buy your game are going to be of European based, or like say the US or Canada or something like that, then you could intentionally look at and go, right, well, what kind of things are those people into, and would have a strong sense of familiarity. What sort of age is my audience going to be now? What would be the ideal point to look back at when they found that familiarity? It all sounds a bit cynical when I'm saying it like that.
I think that you know, there's a lot of truth in what Dina's saying, that it's all kinds of depends on where you're from, and for sure it's not exactly gatekeeping, but it does mean that what you assume will be a point of familiarity for someone might not actually be the thing that draws them in that you assume. I think, and I want to put a pin in it and come back to it in a moment, if that's okay.
If we can come back to that last point Dina made, because I would definitely like to say something on that, because I very much agree.
Just to say hello to CD, and if we come back to it, so we're going to talk about, firstly, some of the good things, okay? Let's talk about let's put a positive spin, because we've been explaining what is familiarity, and you made some great points. Like, we've already talked about the ease of learning, we already talked about the nostalgia, and then you made a lot of points in your show notes. Like, Mandela has written this amazing list of benefits of familiarity of mechanics and theme. Would you like to go through this?
Yeah, sure. So let's talk about some of the things that you can get with mechanisms and the familiarity there. So one immediate thing is the ease of learning. And actually, I'll go straight to an example with this. Are we going to go into each as we come to it, or do you just want to hear me rattle them all? I can't hear you, Bez. I don't know if that's just me.
I'll give the full list and then we'll come back into it. So
okay.
You wrote about the ease of learning. We've already talked about that. Oh, and hello, Paul. It's lovely to see
Paul.
you. And we were talking about you just a moment ago. Everyone was saying you're a lovely person. We talked about you behind our back. Nothing much. Yeah, so we're on the pros. Ease of learning, comfort from people knowing what they like, bringing people in, having like this tried and tested thing. Yesterday we were talking about people constantly reinventing the wheel, and it's standing on the shoulders of giants. Being able to go into more complexity, giving people a bit of a break from all this innovation, because sometimes you just want to relax. And then familiarity of theme, it's like assistance in learning the theme. It's kind of, you're learning about this new setting, you can teach people about stuff. It's easy to be perceived as thematic if people know what to look for. You can use shorthands, piggybacking, like we mentioned a moment ago. And of course, if someone's like, okay, I like zombies, then you attract an audience. And so let's go quickly through these. And yeah, take it away, Mandela.
Yeah, so to see where I was starting from with the mechanisms, obviously the ease of learning, in the example we used earlier, if somebody has played a worker placement game, then if you say, you know, this uses worker placement like that, off you go. As an example of this, for people who have played the game Scythe, I've taught this to people before that game, and it borrows a lot of different mechanisms very clearly from other games. You know, it kind of takes them wholesale, and you can see that and where it's patched together. And I've taught it to some people, and they've certainly struggled, because for somebody quite new to hobby gaming, there is a lot there. But I've taught it to people that are familiar with hobby gaming, and it was very quick and easy. And this is now I'm very conscious that Paul's in the chat and going to say that this is not how one should teach games, and it generally isn't. But when teaching, you know, I could say, oh, this uses the combat system, you know, like in June, remember in Rex we used, yeah, same as that. Okay, this uses that. You know, we could just go through it referring to the touch points that we already had, the mechanisms with which we were already familiar, and we were up and running immediately, because we, even looking at the things and seeing the iconography and where things were placed and so on and could be moved around, our familiarity with previous games allowed us to read into it what would happen. And often actually you can put a game on the table and we might not be able to figure out fully how it plays, but you can actually get reasonably far from using your knowledge of previous games, the icons, the systems that are likely to appear in those situations, that you look at it and go, right, there we go. So that's one of the advantages there. But to touch on something that was commented before, I think it was Alex that said this idea of using something familiar and then shaking it up. You have the ability to build on these mechanisms as well, because you can say, right, you know the worker placement from Agricola? It's like that, except there's this one extra. And then you've immediately cut out that, and you can introduce much more complexity without having as long a learning process to get there. And that's the sort of standing on the shoulder of giants type thing, that you can pack more complexity in there within a short space by using those familiar mechanisms, because it won't seem as overwhelming. But also, yeah, to what Alex said about mixing it up with something unfamiliar, that's sometimes easier to do if you are using a recognized touch point. If I do something really weird with worker placement and really interesting, only the people that actually know worker placement in the first place will see that as innovative. If I introduce that to an entirely new audience, then it will be no more innovative than them just seeing the most basic worker placement system, because it will all be new to them in that regard. But by tapping into what people think is familiar, like if you introduce somebody to cards for the first time, you know, and then you're playing Bonanza, and in Bonanza, one of the features is you cannot rearrange your hand of cards. They have to remain in that order. And a lot of seasoned game players, they go, oh, you know, that's oh, that's interesting, that's clever, that's really a creative way to use it, that's really innovative. I feel it is, you know, I love that. I think it's a great mechanism. But if it's the first time somebody had ever played any card game, and I said that, they would probably just shrug and go, okay, that's how cards work. So even to be innovative, you can do so by working on a known idea. You know, Hanabi, the way the cards are facing as well, being this kind of revelatory thing for people, and I know that appears in some other games as well, is playing on the fact that people's assumption are that you look at your cards and not other people. Like I say, somebody who had never played any card games before would go, all right, so in card games, other people see your cards, you don't. And that's how we play card games. They wouldn't have this, you know, I explain that game and then I drop the bit about you hold your cards that way, and people go, you know, oh, you know, my mind's been blown. I've been playing card games for 10 years and I've never done that before. So,
and it's, yeah, it's because you've got this familiarity that it's almost like postmodernism. Only once you've got to familiarity with something can you appreciate the subversion of it. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
It's like, you know, the original Super Mario Brothers, when on the NES, when you're going along and then at some points, I think it's level 1, 2, if you go onto the left, you actually go up, and then, you know, there's this bits at the top where there's a score, and then you would assume you can't interact with there, because in most games you can't, but you can actually go into that section, and hey, spoilers for a game that was like, I don't know, 40 years ago, but it's like, this is, I mean, to be fair, the tropes of that era are no longer familiar with the people nowadays. So the interesting thing is that if a person saw that, because you don't have the score bar at the top, people aren't familiar with that. If you are a younger person, if you've just been playing the 3D games where, you know, Donkey Kong Country, I think, was one of the first ones where the score came up when you wanted it and it went away. So when you collected the banana, it would pop up and it didn't show everything at once. But, you know, moving on from Manic Miner, Lode Runner, these kinds of games, and then being like, wow, I can jump into that. It's that familiarity that makes us appreciate things. Oh, and Bidina, it was lovely to have you. Thank you for... And so, yes, I agree with Alex's saying it perfectly, to break expectations. There has to already be the expectation. Like, if I dressed up all in green, you know, that would be quite a surprise.
Now, there's a good example. Bez shows up all in green. Everything's turned to green. You know, the whole theme, everything's green. You know, I've got somebody visiting and I say, look, Bez is all green. It would mean nothing to them. They would say, okay, why are you telling me this information? You know, obviously I would be questioning everything I know about the world. You know, this would be a life-changing event for me. But for them, they don't have familiarity with the concept of Bez, and therefore that would be lost on them. So those are some of the ways that not only can we, I think, use it to actually ease learning and allow a greater complexity budget in games, because you revert to things that people already know. So it's not a new learning process for every step of the game. If everything in there was innovative, if everything was completely new, then you have to learn every step. And you know, you can scale this back to as little as you want. Some people, I've heard it being said, you know, as soon as you roll a die in a game, then you're borrowing a mechanism from previous game. You know, that
it's
is
technically true.
Yes, that's a mechanism. Now, so if everything in your game was completely fresh and new and crazy and off the wall,
as soon as you're drawing a card, you're borrowing a mechanism.
Yes, yeah. The very presence of cards in your game is you taking a mechanism that has existed for a long time, obviously, and been used in many different ways. And the way that you can so easily turn a card game is because we can refer to these touch points, because people have those expectations. If I had to explain everything in there, and I have come close to situations where I've been trying to explain kind of everything to people in some particular situation,
because they've been completely new to the concept of games. That's all.
Yes, yeah, they've been close to that, and then it's just, you know, you need to be much more simple in terms of the number of different ideas that are present there, if everything is going to be that. So those are some of the advantages and disadvantages. I guess another thing with the familiarity that we said, Andrew, and what it can sort of bring in comfort and as well in learning. Like a good example, I think, is Ticket to Ride. I think one of the things that's aided its success is that it's kind of an adaptation of Rummy. The way I see it, it uses that core system from Rummy, and it plays on something that is familiar to a lot of people, including an older generation. In fact, generally more an older generation. I only very recently played Rummy, but I know a lot of people who knew their grandparents might have played it with their grandparents at some point, and have said to me, "Oh, have you played Rummy? It's really good stuff like that." So if it's new to somebody, at that point, it's simple enough that it's easy to learn and enjoyable, and probably feels very fresh. If I'd never played Rummy, I'd be like, "Oh, this is a nice, clever way all the cards are working in the collection," and stuff like that. Or any of the other games like Jaipur and stuff that also use that basis for the play.
But I mean, it's evolved quite a bit from Rummy. I mean, obviously in Rummy, you've got multiple types of sets that you can make with any given card, and parts of the decision making is how are you going to put these cards into these different sets? Are you going to put it into run, or are you going to put it in, like, what kind of meld are you going to use the proper?
It takes it exactly
the Ride. It simplifies that aspect of it, and then it's got this race for it. It's got like 5 cards out rather than just 1 card from a discard pile. You know, you can't even pick up from a discard pile. It's very different, and
it doesn't take it wholesale, and you know, it's not just Rummy. I'm not saying that, but it does take from it in a way that I think people who are familiar with Rummy, who wouldn't normally be playing new hobby games necessarily, might feel it's less intimidating to see that and be able to use a system that they're more familiar with and interact with. And the same way, some people have said this, and I think there's maybe some truth in it with Settlers of Catan, now Catan, the fact that it has a die in there as well. Because I found showing people hobby games who have not previously played that type of game before, one of the first things they ask when they open the box, and I've had people actively just looking around the box and tell me, "You've lost the dice." in some Euro game which does not have dice, because it's just an expectation. If there's a board out there, there's going to be dice somewhere, and dice are going to be rolled, and that's something familiar. The idea of on your turn you roll dice, for many people, is a kind of ingrained way that board games work, and so just having that little touch of familiarity might have to some extent aided people.
Meeting expectations. I mean, if we look at, I think it's like comfort, surprise, and then completion, which is like the 3 things that you want to go through. And it's like you do want to comfort your players at the start. You do want to be a little bit comfortable. Even you need that surprise, but you need that comfort to get yourself started, for sure. And so, yeah, that is an amazing respite. You're 100% correct. And having that, okay, there's this trading. Okay, well, maybe whoa, it's not like Monopoly. You mean you can't trade anytime you want? You can only trade when it's the turn of one of the people involved in the trade. Whoa, what's going on? Okay, you roll 2d6. Okay, at least I know what I'm doing here. Okay, at least I'm rolling to.
And actually, I think that's a point with familiarity as well. So going into more hobby games and using the design points that we might be familiar with, if you're introducing a new and innovative thing, I think it can be quite beneficial. I think designers do this consciously or not, often will embed it with some more familiar points, because even for hobby players, having to some extent a bit of respite in returning to something they know how to do, having a bit of set collection in there or something that they've encountered many times before, helps them ground an understanding for this new way that they interact with the game. Because if they have to have, let's say, a new way to interact with the game and then a new way that the whole scoring system is going to work as well, then that just might be, I kind of need a break here, as it were. I need a point I can set back.
Let's take a break and let's answer a couple of tangential questions from Paul.
Paul, I'd love to see your review Glasgow. I'm not in charge of that. I guess you'd have to contact Asmodee here. I can give you the contact for them, but I'd be surprised if you don't have it. But you can drop them a message, try and get it, or shill out the whatever it's, I think like 17 quid or something, and get a coffee. But unfortunately, I don't know how to directly. But if you do actually want to know, just drop me a message on Twitter. You're saying, did I get your message? So maybe I didn't open and read it.
Apparently, there's a message on Twitter already. So apparently you've missed that. So 2, we've been asked about Cullompton.
Cullompton. I know nothing about Cullompton. Sorry, Paul, you might have to wait for that one. Why don't you design the game about Cullompton? One of the things Paul talks about less frequently, because they're so consumed with the teaching people how to play games and revising rules, is that Paul's a game designer as well. Probably doesn't find as much time to dabble in that at the moment. But get off your butt and get the Cullompton game made, Paul.
Wow, strong words from Mandela. Wow, the challenge has been laid down. And it's a place in the UK. There's lots of funny place names in the UK, right? And we've got this preview from Alex. Let me actually take off the banner. So, yeah, this is what it would look like if I was green for a day.
Oh, I see. That's the mock-up.
Yeah,
it's a lot to handle. How do you feel about that, Bez?
I mean, I could see it being a thing for like St. Patrick's Day or like just one day. I don't know. Like, I don't know if do I want to get into the whole wearing green for St. Patrick's. Anyway, so that's definitely a thing. So
top work. I like it.
And yeah, I don't know if you've seen that Twitter vid about how young kids mimic speaking on the phone as compared to older people. I never thought about that until I saw it. So I think it's like young people would go like that, whereas old people would maybe hold a thing, or maybe they do that. I don't know.
Oh, right. So they mimic speaking on the phone as compared
and basically the way that you pretend that you're speaking on the phone is going to be different depending on what you're used to kind of holding.
I see.
And so I guess what Javier is talking about is that the familiarity, it's so different. And so, getting back into what, do you want to rush past the other things, the other pros that you were going to talk about? Or shall we just go straight into the pitfalls?
Let's go on to some other stuff then.
Yeah. So you were talking about familiarity or theme, assisting in learning the game. We've already talked about that. Learning setting not generally considered as fun. What do you mean by that?
So I'm being distracted by Paul saying, "Am I?" with regards to the game designer. I thought you were co-designer on the Rage Night stuff, Paul. Trying to distance themselves from it now.
Yeah, Paul
sorry,
doesn't
Biz.
take compliments very well, I don't think.
So, Biz, sorry, what was your question there?
So, what do you mean by learning setting not generally considered as fun?
Right. So this is a problem that I feel I've faced, and I'm going to use a specific example in that there's a game I have sitting around that I started designing and will hopefully return to and finish designing at some point. And it's set around the mythology of the foundation of the Inca Empire. The game's called Tiwanakuta. And so the theme is something that I think in the loosest sense is familiar to people. There's plenty of games that are based around Tawantinsuyu and the Empire, in fact, including a game that's come out just recently called Tawantinsuyu, and it's not the first one to bear that name. However, when you get into the specifics, because I was looking at it from the perspective of the indigenous group, they're one of the ones that formed what would become part of this empire that would be absorbed into it, and their view on the mythology of that. So, and let me be clear, this is still like a Eurogame, you know, it's not incredibly deeply, richly thematical ever in that regard, but it uses some of those touch points. And I realized when I try and teach the people the game, it was a constant cause of me having to explain some of the history there, some of the cultural tendencies that are present for that tribe, in order to then explain why that kind of makes sense in the game. Now, they could play it and it could not make sense at all, and that's fine. You know, they're just not going to really enjoy it so much. They're just going to think
the benefit is that people are learning the game. I mean, learning the history of the culture.
That people are familiar with it is because they can just go straight into that and say, all right, I know pirates, so I expect pirates to be riding the seas and they're going to be doing bad things, but that's okay because they're pirates and I get to be a pirate. They're going to be wanting to get gold. They're going to be searching for buried treasure. You know, all these things you can build in as an expectation. And therefore, when people see those things reflected in the theme, they go, oh, this is thematic because I'm a pirate and I'm trying to get buried treasure. So the theme has succeeded in that regard. And it lets them lets them see the theme as a success, and they don't need to learn about pirates. Generally, they're basing it off what they already know or assume about pirates to enjoy that. If I introduce this new thing that's less familiar to the European and North American audience that we mentioned earlier, then to them, it might be like, oh, but why, what's doing it? So to engage with that more fully, they actually kind of need to learn something a bit deeper about the theme there. They need to know what that is and what it means. And that's not really what most people come to board games for. Okay? I'm sure some people, I love learning.
I mean, there are some people who play High Frontier or, you know, BIOS Genesis because they really want to learn. And that's why anyone would play any of Eklund's game, or people who play war games are all about learning. But I get what you're saying. What you're saying is that's a familiar theme. It allows you to use these shorthands, and it's going to allow you to teach the game faster.
Yes, exactly.
And I would 100% agree.
And those games that you just mentioned, think about the niche audience to which they appeal. These are not big market games, and the people who enjoy them, you know, from what I've heard, if you think about things like BIOS Genesis and so on, even they approach it as a bit of an event thing to get into. You know, they're going to have to learn all this. You don't just stumble in casually to a game of that and come out the other side. So if you want to make experiences which can be more broadly appreciated, then it's difficult to do so if you also have to teach them the theme behind that. So somebody's mentioned the flag there, so that's actually good. So that this Wipala, that is of the Aymara people, my family are Aymara, which were one of the groups that ended up being represented in the Tawantinsuyu empire, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to make the game on that subject and based around that. But when I play tested it, so for example, you could make people in the game. You could make new people, which is not too uncommon in worker placement type games. It's not a worker placement game, but that's a sort of thing that you see sometime in games. But you would do so using stone and some maize as well. And when I took it along to playtest, immediately playtester chuckled and said to another one something along the lines of, right, because that's thematic, isn't it? People are made of stone. Now they are in the myth of the foundation of the Aymara people. People were made of stone, and those people then turned into some of the monuments that we see that remain as a legacy there. And that's what happened in the game. You could make people, you made them out of stone and maize, and then they would actually remain, and you could turn them into the monuments. And people just thought, this guy does not care about theme at all. He's just like, thinking, right, what's going to work here? And, people were deriding the idea, like, all right, now the person turns into a monument, even though they were a person. What, did we crush them up? Or, things like that. So am I going to try and teach them the theme in order to let them enjoy the game more? They probably don't want to sit and read an essay before we start. So, yeah.
And I think that kind of ties into some of the potential pitfalls of what Dina was mentioning earlier that we said we would come back to, which was all about how different things are familiar to different people, and to quickly say, hello, Tio, and maybe Tio is familiar to lots of people, maybe Tio isn't. And Chris suggests teaching that with small amounts of flavor text, but then maybe if someone gives you a full history lesson, then maybe that's putting a dampener on it. And do people, again, tying into what you said, whether people actually want to learn at this point? Let me scroll back to, hopefully I've got...
a note on that, putting small amounts of flavor text in, I did think about that, and I think when I write the rules for that game, I will, unfortunately, I'm drifting away from the adherence to the theme, partly on these reasons. It's too much of a challenge in that way, but for what I do keep in, I'll probably make reference in the rulebook. But then that's the person who read the rulebook, and are they going to reiterate that to everybody who plays?
I think it's a lovely theme, and actually that's not that long a thing to pass on. Okay, this is a game about the myth of people being built of stone and maize and going.
But that's one aspect of the game, Bez. That's generally an incidental thing that happens in it. It's the same way that in Stone Age, you send two people to the Love Shack and a new person comes out. People can intuitively understand that. The game isn't built around the Love Shack. And I would like it for my game to be able to do that, where no, the game's not built around this. It's just a thing that happens incidentally in it. So that was one example. But if I were to go into every other aspect of the game as well, then unfortunately it goes beyond just being that small bit of explanation. That
seems like a really interesting topic, that just to keep the conversation a little bit grounded. I think that let's put a pin in that. I'd love to have you on maybe in the future, and maybe on your own or with other people, to talk about that, about presenting new unfamiliar topics to people and the challenges that faces. Because this is the issue, isn't it? Where you want to share parts of your culture, you want to share things, and you don't want it to have to necessarily be the focus. Do you know what I mean? Like, it kind of... So I'm just going to do this for like 1 minute. It's like kind of, let's say there's trans people or queer people or whatever on TV. Like, it shouldn't be like that's the sum total of their identity. It should be like someone's there and they are that, but like it's just parts of who they are, but they're actually still an awesome warrior, or they're still, the doctor figure, but they just happen to be trans or whatever. Do you know what I mean? That would... And no, but there's a lot to unpack there, and I think that just to come back to what we said we would, firstly, Chris says that familiarity has lost lots of its power in the media world. It seems 90% of new entertainment is either based on something nostalgic or relates to something else, which has led to people complaining that there is nothing new or original being made anymore. And this is one of the pitfalls where people might start complaining, might start feeling shortchanged. How would you address this?
Well, I think that's in itself. So it'd be nice to obviously keep it somewhat board game, but using the reference of media more broadly, there's truth in that. You know, there's a lot of rechurning of ideas, rebooting of things, tying into something familiar. And you can say that some people are kicking back against it, but if you look at where the money is, you know, if you compare how much Star Wars, the latest Star Wars makes, to a more novel and creative film, even if it's appreciated and generally well received, it's, you know, it's minuscule compared to that. So you could criticize the extent to which people are tapping into this, but the success often still lies with these things that reiterate. Yeah, so Chris is saying money, but, you know, and you see it with, let's say, board games where there is not as much money kicking around as some of these big forms of media engagement, but you're still going to get a lot more money from a zombicide than an entirely new random zombie game even. You know, and even the zombie games tapping into people's, you know, interest in zombies. So you can say things, I think, that are, you know, I'm probably one of those people. I get a bit tired, you know, I see all Marvel films coming out and everything and think, you know, I like a lot of independent films and stuff like that and think, wouldn't it be great to have more of that going in and some more attention and funding paid towards new stories? But the fact of the matter is, you know, I still end up seeing a lot of those other films. People have the thirst for it. They can complain about it, but they very often still go and indulge in all those things which are familiar pleasures. So
just to say, thank you so much to Obscure Curio, who's rated us on Twitch, and hello to Obscure Curio, CEO of Curls, and yeah, everyone who's come over from that channel. We are, if you're joining us a bit late, we are just talking about familiarity in board games and how people talk about familiarity or old hat stuff like it's a bad thing. And so yeah, kind of also, but the familiarity, what the big takeaway is that it depends on the person. It's so personal, whether it's part of your myth, part of your culture, or whether this thing that's familiar to you is actually going to be familiar to the person playing the game, because everyone around the table has a different experience. And so this whole familiarity with board games, it's like just about, okay, are you familiar with zombies? Are you familiar with zombicides? Are you going to be familiar with these mechanics? Anyway, so thank you to Obscure Kuro, and massive shouts out. Hello, Ghost of Coreyheim, and yeah, thank you all to joining us. And let's skim back to Dina's question, which was about how can we make sure this doesn't end up as gatekeeping, because you always, by communicating based on your assumed shared culture, this can be gatekeeping for those who are not of said culture and do not share that familiarity. Because obviously when you're talking about your thing of the myth of people being built of stones and maze and then going back into that time, you want it to be a little part of the game. You don't want it to be, okay, here's an entire game just to get across this one aspect. But and in that direction, it's not like such a bad thing, because it's not like, hey, here's this dominant culture stamping down on this, you know, yeah, subservient culture, I want to say. This is like not, I don't know the right word to use. How would you help me out with words, please?
Less prevalent, basically, in that.
Yeah, yeah. And so you're kind of wanting to have everyone on an equal footing. And so if we continue talking about the Mona Lisa, then we are basically, you know, bigging up European art, while ignoring the, you know, why don't we start talking about Frida Kahlo or, you know, other people from, you know, I don't know, let's talk about the, you know, I'm trying to think of a ukiyo artist and I'm struggling because this is the way it's been propagated. Like there's so much from the West, so much from America, from Europe going to the East, but there's not much coming the other way around. So how can we prevent? It's not about gatekeeping. It's almost about stamping down and assuming this knowledge and then keeping on propagating this knowledge endlessly. How can we stop that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly the issue. By playing on what we already have that is familiar, you are then furthering our reliance on those. And I think, to be quite honest, it's probably largely going to come down to having a diversity of voices in this, and I think that extends beyond. So I'm going to. This is a bit more of a delicate thing to talk about, but when we talk about diversity,
do you want me to flash up the sad stuff?
No, not in that way. I don't think this will be for anybody. I just mean choosing my words carefully in saying it. And it's interesting because there's been obviously a big push in the public awareness and within the board game sphere, within the sphere of many different forms of media, about diversity and representation within that. So I am not, you know, I don't consider myself white most of the time due to my heritage, but I do have one white parent, whatever. Bez, I understand you don't consider yourself white, you know, of different heritage, whatever. So for many standards, yourself and myself, and there are various other people in the UK communicate with, work with, would be considered, you know, to represent some kind of diversity within the board game sphere. And that's all good, and I think all of our voices are important in that regard, and our contributions. And I don't just mean from a general way I want to see society, but I actually mean from getting better games there, getting fresher games and different ideas, and having different people to bounce off, and all those kinds of things are really helpful. But I do have a slight concern, which I generally hold back because I don't know how useful it is to the movement, that a lot of the diversity we talk about is actually still from very much within our heavily privileged upbringing and dynamics we have there. You know, we both grew up in the UK, in a Western society, and therefore, whilst we might, to some, be considered diverse voices, we still represent something filtered very heavily through the UK culture.
I mean, Tally, who made Doggo Dash or Dugo Dash, is Brazilian, but has come to Germany, a very different place. And so, yeah, when we talk about board games, we're just talking about everything, whether it's a card game, it's like the whole universe. It's basically, it doesn't even need to have a board. Like anything that you play on the table with people in real life, and we could get into, you know, as digital board games, an actual board game, which, you know, in this day and age, that's the best we've got. But yeah, basically, it's when you make this board game, you are for sure representing parts of yourself. And I just want to say quickly, someone in France assumed that I was Indian, which, for the record, I'm not Indian. I'm not like, I wouldn't be shy about it if I was. I wouldn't feel like embarrassed to be Indian. Like, and I enjoy having like some heritage, but unfortunately I don't. But I think because they were reviewing a game called Yogi, which is maybe based on yoga, and that's where Sugarmint got the name from. But if, like, I don't know why it's a bit of a leap of logic, because, okay, Shahriori, that's a name that I don't recognize. Let's assume that they're Indian. Whereas Shahriori is actually a strong Farsi name. It means a very specific thing. And, yeah.
But what I want to say there, and hello to the new people, hello Alina, is that with this push for diversity, what we're actually hearing from a lot in a lot of situations, and it's still a good thing, is voices of people who are of different ethnic heritage but are still from these countries. And what we're hearing less of is actually people from around the world, from different cultures, from entirely different socioeconomic environments, and yeah, from completely different cultural heritages, which have remained in those cultures and those environments. And it will be very difficult to get anything to have a foothold that has that, because of our reliance on working from what we know, in the board game sphere specifically, because of the barrier to teaching and learning.
So the problem is that people aren't willing to embrace things if they're a little bit too different. That maybe people aren't willing to look past certain things. I mean, for sure, KC, I've had them on this show a few times. I'm having them on again on 14th, which I think is a week tomorrow, as a group chat. And Casey's done some amazing work allowing other designers as well, and starting to turn some traditional tribal games into, okay, let's actually just formalize these rules and get, okay, what's one version of the game out. But then we might see it and be like, whoa, this doesn't look like a board game as I expect it. And so and I also want to say that you do need money to mass market these games, to get them out there. Yeah. Even if you are getting these games to be print and play on itch.io or something like that, you still need to have a certain internet connection. You need to have and there's going to be, for sure, like the Village game, which turned into I can't remember, Ogbu. It's like an abstract strategy game done by KC, and I really had a lot of fun with it with Layla. We played it about 7 times. Layla's won like 5 of them. But I'm still determined to do better. It's lots of fun just learning my way about this abstract strategy game, which is just what I'm enjoying. And if KC had not been privileged enough to, have these grants received, because there have been grants, there's been donations, worldwide. KC has done some funding, people have donated money, donated games from the USA and from Europe. So it feels very much like us offering a hand to lift someone up. And yeah, Alex says you also need a privilege of time to set aside. But otherwise, those tribal games, those something that maybe someone's played in a tiny village in, Peru, I don't know, and we might never hear about it because there's no one going out exploring, finding these games and cataloging them, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah. Yes. I'd be encouraged to bring us back a bit more to our discussion of familiarity. Although I do think, I genuinely think this is a big and an interesting, important topic, and I don't. Part of the reason I want to bring it back is because I don't see an obvious solution to it in the way that board games are, in the way people want to engage with them, and then the experiencing of these different themes. And this is particularly, I'm talking about themes here. Themes in board games, and I am somebody who plays a lot of board games that are trading in the Mediterranean and the like, because I want to get to seeing how they interact. And I guess I don't think about this consciously, but I guess on some subconscious level, I probably don't want the theme to get in the way of me then engaging with the system. I want the theme to help. I want to play a game like Agricola and enjoy it. And Agricola, for anybody who doesn't know, is a farming game, and it does quite well to use the farming theme to help explain how you play the game. When you plant crops, then they are tied up for some time in your field. However, you get more crops out of it over time. If you have some animals together of the same type.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's familiar. That makes it sense.
And I can learn the game much more easily because of those basic touch points. So what I want from a theme very often is for it to not get in the way of me enjoying and learning the game, and ideally actually assist me in the process of learning and enjoying the game. And that's where it becomes particularly difficult to try and introduce these things that are entirely novel to our understanding. And I've seen even, so to stay with this theme idea and familiarity, you know, I was thinking briefly before I sent you that email, I thought, well, what games maybe have a completely sort of novel theme? And the one that sprung to mind just immediately, because it's a game that's coming out soon, if it's not already out, called Cosmic Frog. Because a lot of people have been saying, oh, I love the wild theme of this, and I do too. It looks great. It's about cosmic frogs, these giant world-eating frogs, from my understanding. And that's what people look at. I go, oh, it's great
like,
to have it.
Almost like a Terry Pratchett type thing.
Yeah. And you think,
reminds me of Douglas Adams.
They are not going for, you know, trading in the Mediterranean kind of thing. They're just like, why aren't more designers doing this? Why aren't they just going out there? And obviously there's novelty in that theme, and it interests me for that reason, but it still leads into some cultural touch points. So my understanding in the game is the frogs then hold these in their gullet, and anybody who's seen a frog or knows a basic bit about frog biology, that makes sense to them. You know, it will help them learn the game knowing what a frog is.
I don't even know what a gullet is. I'm just going to admit my ignorance.
So they will hold it down there. But I think even still, so what do you know about frogs? What do you think of when you think frog?
I think that they've got two bulbous eyes that are on top of their head.
Yeah.
I think that they're amphibians. Like they start off as little tadpoles that are just swimming around, and then they are able. I think they might need to have moisture. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Because as amphibians, but I would. I mean, you didn't give the answer I was hoping for. The obvious thing is they jump. You know, they jump around the place.
Yeah.
Right, that's what people think. So in the game, my understanding is these cosmic frogs, they jump around the place, and by using the familiarity of frogs, that's going to make it much more easy to learn than if you just said, you know, this game's called Cosmic Wablarg.
Salamander.
It's about an entirely fictional animal.
Oh,
you know,
yeah, I get
this
what you're
is
saying.
what it does, because you would have to learn the animal, the fictional animal, if it was going to help you learn the game.
Like
in
this
any way.
Wablarg that jumps around everywhere.
Exactly. You go, oh, right, okay, so these are jumping. Whereas if it's frog, you go, oh, of course, because it's a frog, it makes sense. And that will solidify. So even something that's like meant to be out there and crazy theme, I think is still tapping into the ability to use that as a learning tool for the game, or assisting us and understanding, than if somebody made a game about you know, a tribal form of weaving something of which I had absolutely no familiarity. I would actually find it easier to relate to, you know, the cosmic frog idea than that, unfortunately. And actually, animals are a very good example of tapping in
and
to that.
Just because I want to, sorry about this, wind down and ask, how can we do this well? How can we use familiarity? How can we use it judiciously? Presumably you want something that is somewhat familiar, but you don't want to be nothing but familiar. Or is it enough? Is, like we already discussed, CD earlier on asked about, can you just change one mechanism in a game and a theme and have it be a totally new thing? And yes, absolutely. Episode 143 talked about legality and ethics of online gaming, but we did also go into a lot of stuff there where basically, short story, there are precedents of people having just had Bang versus Three Kingdoms, which is basically exactly the same but with a different theme. And so, but if you want it to actually be I guess there's the ethical question of how much can you lift, and there's, now we're kind of getting into that whole thing of plagiarism. But just to wrap it up and keep it somewhat light if we can, what tips would you give people for using familiarity?
What tips should I give? I think more a tip to say it's okay to use, you know, I'm not the decision maker on this at all. Obviously, nobody is. But I think it might be nice for some designers to recognize for their own peace of mind when making board games, that it's okay to have some familiar elements in there, and it might actually help your players come to grips with it, to learn it. It's not a cop out to work off something that's done before.
Yeah, I think that's totally true. And I think that what I will say is that the sum total has to be something quite different. And so respect other designers, if you're a designer, respect the work that other designers have done, respect the work that they have done, and don't just take an entire game and then change the art and publish it as your own. I think that's just not cool. And hopefully everyone in chat would agree with that. But as you say, if I'm respect, and I think this gets into, like, with the rules for couple, I give a shout out to Bonanza, because even though in couple it's all about, have you played couple, by the way?
I don't think so, no.
So this is a 2-player cooperative game that I made for the L deck, where the L deck, for those who are new, it's 2 letters on each card, and then each person has a set line of cards. You're not allowed to change the cards in your line unless you use an action to do it. So it's basically all about using 2 actions per turn. So like 1 action, you can give someone else a card to insert it anywhere else you want. And that also allows you to get rid of a letter that might be blocking your words, if you know what I mean. Another action is you can move someone else's. Anyway, the point is that give credit and understand that things come from somewhere. And having a page at the end of your rule sheets, I think, to say, hey, this is where these things come from, that's good. And if you can, tap into thematically familiar things. If you tap into, okay, let's say I've got a game about ships. Well, of course, if it hits a rock, then that's going to be bad for the ship, presumably. I mean, I don't know of any ship that's actually, like, maybe there's a weird spaceship that's collecting rocks. I don't know. But you know what I mean. But yeah, just do things. Oh, Paul has now designed a Clubton game. It's 100% the same as Glasgow, but with different artwork.
Sounds great, Paul. Look forward to it. I look forward to the international audience trying to say Clubton as well. I don't think I even know how to say it correctly.
Oh, Paul, you wag. Anyway, so I want to say thank you to everyone. This has been really brilliant. I think that I need to recap everything. So just, yeah, this is Mandela. I am Bez. We've been speaking about board games. We've been speaking about taking breaks, about Wavelength, which is like a brilliant game that Mandela has not played, but you totally should. If you're in German, it's known as Perfect Partner or Perfect Match. And we talked a little bit about porridge, how many tastes you can get from porridge, about studying smells and forensics, of how we both come from Glasgow and Dundee, and how that familiarity, like about relating to each other, about relating to folk, and just kind of checking things off a list. About what it means is to have an understanding of a thing. You might have experienced it 10 times or 1,000,000 times, but if you haven't understood it, it's about having that understanding of it. That's the familiarity aspect. And it's not about the number of encounters, but the depth of understanding. And familiarity culture changes it. The good bits are it helps us in learning games. It helps us bring nostalgia. It helps also, I guess, broadcast this is what this is. Because if I have a game that's, hey, this is about romantic comedies and I call it Fog of Love, maybe I'm not in the mood for that game, but maybe I am. Either way, I know more easily. And maybe I've got a game that's about squabbling cats called Kitty Cataclysm. And hey, I know instantly. And it's because of that familiarity of that touch point. It helps us teaching other games. And we talked about different ethnicities, working on games, but not necessarily from different socio-economic environments, which is a really interesting thing. We talked about familiarity, standing up on the shoulders of giants, and there is no obvious solution, as you said, to wanting to bring more people into games, but there are kind of little things we can do, but that's a conversation all of its own. And ultimately, it's okay to be familiar, but give credit, and I think that's the best thing. So yeah, you did miss the. Oh, thank you very much, Paul, and thank you very much for sticking around. I'm very happy. Paul was sad to miss the porridge discussion. Ask me online what I have in my porridge each day. So okay, after this, ask Paul. I guess Paul's teasing us, getting. So I will sure ask Paul in their next live Q&A over on YouTube. And so that is the recap. Is there anything that I've left out?
No, I think you did a very, very good job of that for what was quite a bit of rambling. I could easily go on about a lot of these topics for a long time. So.
Oh, I think we could just carry on rambling for another 5 hours, I feel like. It has been a really nice conversation. I have promised certain people that it will be done by 12 o'clock, as a hard limit from now on. So I just want to say, if you want to find me, stuffwithbez.com, stuffbez.bigcartel.com, where you can buy some games, even like print and play games, and twitter.com/stuffbybez. It's where I share lots of stuff. Instagram.com/stuffbez for pictures. Twitch TV/stuffbybez is the best place for my streaming because there's a great community. And I want to facebook.com/thingsbybez is a thing. Stuffbybez@gmail.com, and I will find your links, although they are cut off, I think, by thingy. Oh, wait a minute. Sorry about this. So let us know where you like to be found, Mandela.
I'm not so good
exciting
with the self-promotion here. I'm on Twitter now. You can find me at Mandela FG. On Twitter, there we go. You can see it scrolling now. Or you can just look me up on Board Game Geek or look at that game Glasgow that's out now and find out through that my activities. There I am on Twitter. Yep, you can go follow me there, where I'll post sometimes about new games being designed and about the current games. That's specifically, I keep that for gaming. If you want to know about any of the scientific stuff, if anybody has any questions about that or anything, please feel free to drop me a message.
And yeah, here's a bit of someone talking.
The recap thing is blocking the subtitles on that.
Oh, whoops, sorry. So let's see who is the winner of this game, and then tomatoes. Kind of having that for the bad auto translate. Yeah, so thank you very much, Alex. Javier asks, yeah, how would you describe Glasgow? Tell us about it in 2 minutes.
I get 2 minutes. So it's a quick.
Well, first, you get 5 words.
5 words. Oh God. Quick city building 2-player. There we go.
Okay, so now you get 2 minutes.
So it's a wee 2-player game in which you build up the city of Glasgow. It's quite interactive because the way in which you get the things to build up the city works on a kind of time track. So you need to think about when you're going to give away more to your opponent, basically. And the city you build is a communal city, so where you place each of the buildings is going to matter. And it is about building up the grid city centre of Glasgow, which is one of its notable features. And I'm going to use this chance, because I'm usually like this, to say something I wanted to say when we were talking about familiarity and theme, and Chris in the chat mentioned putting in some information in the rulebook. So some people have commented on the theme of Glasgow saying, oh, it's basically abstract, whatever. There are some things there that were kind of intentionally thematic that seem to be missed by people. And again, this is about explaining. And even there in the rulebook, at the start of the rulebook, it talks about how Glasgow is one of the first grid cities in the world. And I'm not saying this is like deeply entrenched in theme that you're going to feel you're walking the streets of Glasgow, but you are specifically building up that grid city as a representation of what happened in the 18th century in Glasgow. And I've heard people say things like, oh, I don't think the city was just, you know, torn down and built up from the base. And well, actually it kind of was during that restructure. I've heard people say, oh, they call these things stone when I'm sure they meant to say brick. And it's like, well, no, the sandstone's actually kind of one of the signature features of, you know, you can see the red sandstone there as the little components. So all those little things, you know, people saying, oh, you're apparently meant to be going around the Clyde. I don't see why that's thematic at all. And I think, well, no, this is actually where people would go and get contracts and broker the deals for the resources that they then used. But I'm not going to write, you know, there's not space in the rulebook. People simultaneously have praised the brevity of the rulebook, how quick and easy it is to pick up and get into. And that would be lost if I wrote an essay in the back about why it was thematic. And you know, I just want them to enjoy the game, really. If they experience some of that, if it comes through, I would hope people like, you know, Bez from Glasgow might play it and go, oh, I get that. Oh, that's that place. Oh, you know, this is like.
And yeah, there's an entire discussion here about little details that may be missed and giving credits, and we've barely touched upon any of that, but I just want to say thank you to everyone. It's been a brilliant show, and parts of that obviously is thanks to Mandela, and I want to say thank you very much, Mandela, for being like a brilliant guest, and you had some amazing questions, like just raising the question of like, and show notes. It's been wonderful, and thank you everyone who's been chiming in. Like, thank you Paul, who's been like watching, and who's now designed Clumpton. Yeah, thank you Javier for being around. Thank you Alex for the lovely words, and thank you to all my moderators. Thank you Alex, Xate, and like everyone who's still around, and Chris. And I meant to not name people by names, because then I thought, okay, I'm just going to go for everyone who's still in chat. CD and Cheap Sheep and Chris, and I see people that I'm not sure if they want to be known, but like, yeah, and like thank you Obscure Curio for like raiding us. That was like really, thank you for bringing your people over. I hope you've enjoyed it. I don't know if you're listening again. Thank you to Ghost of Corey. Like, it's like just lovely. Yeah, thank you everyone. You're just lovely people.
Yeah,
and
thanks
so,
a lot, people, for the questions. Really nice to see a little bit of engagement.
And for 2 minutes before we finish, maybe 3 minutes, we'll say, over to you. What are you up to? Tell us something, only if you want to. So if is there anything that you want to share, something you're really looking forward to, hopes or ambitions, share anything, whether it's exciting or trivial or important or just fun. I mean, I was like looking at my thing and thinking, oh my God, like I've got so many streams to look forward to. I've got some amazing guests coming up, like Chris's topic tomorrow about like, you know, chatting about like interviewing. I'm actually genuinely excited about that. And then I'm having like Shem Phillips and Martin Wallace on next week, which is quite exciting for me. And I'm having my first hosting like of multiple people, not just 2 people from one company. Like I think I had Rose and Peter on together once, but I'm having actually 3 people that I brought together to talk about imposter syndrome, which is on Wednesday. I'm just really excited about, like, thank you. I'm excited about the streams, and I'm going to try and do lots of drawing today. I'm going to redraw all the letters. There's 26 of them. Wish me luck. Thank you. So what are you looking forward to? What do you want to share?
Reaching out to people in the chat here.
So to wrap up the conversation and to acknowledge everyone I have been on the phone with, I'm hoping to get a job fast so I don't get thrown out of my apartment. Fingers crossed. And yeah, definitely good luck. Chris is about to talk to Chris Bockley about their upcoming game. Excellent. Like more gaming design. Aquasulis is, I've got more game stuff to do by the end of the week. A new version of my prototypes to show off to my mentor. Awesome. Is that the mentorship thing that's being run by Mike Belsole and Grace Kendall? Oh, Cheap Sheep Games celebrates midnight in 5 minutes. Yay for midnight, I guess. Yeah, drawing off camera, because drawing on camera, it's like, you know, I need to fiddle with that. I'm sorry. But yeah, apparently that is it. It is the one by Grace Kendall and Mike Balsol. But what do you have to look forward to? Mandela, Fernandez Grandon, Mandela FG. What are you looking forward to?
I like the address file name. Well, actually, I'm doing that mentorship scheme as well. Got a couple of mentees, so that's really good fun. I was just corresponding with them before this, so I look forward to meetings with them because it's really exciting to hear about their game projects. I'm looking forward to some work stuff, actually. I'll be doing a lecture later where I get to talk about parasites, one of my favorite things to talk about with it, and parasites manipulating their hosts and stuff like that. And students seem pretty engaged, and so that should be fun. Look forward to getting a bit of time to do some of my own game design stuff and pushing that forward. Cut some mechanisms from a game recently, in a very literal sense, took a pair of scissors and just cut all those bits out of the game. And now look forward to when I get a chance to try that again.
Wish I could talk to you more about that, but Paul's saying that Kanban video, Euthia rulebook live unboxing at 5 p.m. Nice.
What's Euthia?
So that's 5 p.m. UK time, I assume. So for our international listeners, that's 4 p.m. GMT. Then more work this evening. And cordyceps are cool, but also terrifying.
I will next week. I'm going to make a student give that sounds very forceful. A student will be giving a brief presentation on cordyceps, actually. That's a type of fungi.
So if you have enjoyed this, please share, spread the word. There is a special day, Bez and Friends Game Day, Saturday the 17th of October. Please keep the date in your calendar if you are intrigued by board games. It'll be, if you've never played a board game, that's totally cool. There will be my morning stream from 10 a.m. introducing the people. Then from 12:30, it's like, okay, let's introduce the game. And then 1 p.m. on Discord, everyone's playing it. So it will be simultaneously me streaming, alternating between filling up time and just chatting to anyone who's in the chat, which, yeah, it feels recently we've got to really push anyway. I'm sorry, it's almost 12. But yeah, if you want to find out more about my things, go to stuffbybez.com/streams, which will redirect you to my Google Calendar, which will tell you about what's happening in future. Tonight, 8 p.m. we are playing something. We've still not decided what. And I guess there is basically only one thing left to do. And do you know what that one thing left to do is, Mandela?
No, tell me, Bez.
Do you not know what this one thing left to do is?
No, I don't know what the one last thing is. That to say goodbye to our lovely viewers?
Oh, it is exactly. Oh, I see that. So yeah, I'm going to say bye, 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 bye. This is the goodbye song. Bye, 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye, 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye, 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 bye. And now it's time to go. Bye, 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 bye. This is the goodbye song. Bye, 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye, 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye, 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 bye. And now it's time to go. Bye-bye, everyone.